Now, we've got a great panel of speakers today with us to tackle some of the issues involved, representing some of the different facets of the diversity sphere: race, gender, sexuality, disability. But we also want to hear from you as well. That's really, really important. So you will be able to post your own questions after our panel discussion, which will last for about 20-25 minutes or so. And then you can put your own questions to our panel, which will be for maybe 10-15 minutes or so. So our first speaker, Dr. Anne-Marie Imafidon, is co-founder of STEMettes. Listen, just explain why diversity is important from your point of view.
So for me, diversity is incredibly important because I'm a technologist, I'm an innovator, I'm someone that creates things, hopefully to solve problems rather than create them. But when we look at the future that we're creating, the way that society is evolving and all these new innovations that we have, if we only have one type of person building them and influencing them and deciding which get built and deciding which problems we solve with technology and deciding which technologies we fund, then we're going to end up having a lot of technology that doesn't work for large parts of society. And that causes harm rather than helping, which is what we're seeing in a lot of the innovation that we're seeing today. So for me, diversity is super important because a lot of people can be technical, and you don't just have to be that stereotypical dead white man to be able to innovate. So that's why diversity is really important.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Sophie Ward is an actor, author, and LGBTQ plus campaigner. She's the author of a number of books, including A Marriage Proposal, The Importance of Equal Marriage and Love and Other Thought Experiments, which was longlisted for the Booker Prize. Morning, Sophie. Just explain to our audience why diversity is important from your perspective.
Yes, well, I mean, I've had sort of quite a personal journey, a relationship with how much things have changed in Britain for people who are LGBTQ plus. So in the last 25 years, thanks to changes in the law, but also just general societal changes, hearts and minds have really, really been changed. And my personal life experience is very different now from how it was 25 years ago. When it comes to companies' innovation, you can see what a difference that would make to be able to have. Yeah, diversity is a bit obviously of a buzzword, but I think it's more that there isn't such a person as a default human. I think Grayson Perry coined that term. We're all different, we're all diverse. And the broader that your employment field and your customer base can include people from all walks of life and reflect that is so essential, I think, to moving forward.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you for that, Sophie. Adam Pearson is a presenter, speaker, and award-winning disability rights campaigner. He's been a panelist and speaker at the likes of the World Health Innovation Summit, One Young World Summit, and the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. Morning, Adam. Good to see you. The importance of diversity from your perspective.
I've always regarded diversity as a bit of a no-brainer. And I think whatever sphere you're working in and whatever level of influence you have in that sphere, it should always be representative of the audience that it is you're trying to serve. And if it isn't, all you're going to wind up with is sort of a best guess scenario where you have a bunch of, in my case, non-disabled people trying to think, oh, what do disabled people want/need? When in reality, if you have more people with disabilities putting into that ecosystem, into that environment, it's a win-win. So yeah, I think if you have what goes on behind the scenes reflective of what's going on in front of the world in plain sight, that's when you're nailing diversity.
Indeed. It's a win-win. Okay, let's go to Dave Birss. He works with companies to develop an ideas culture, and the core of his thinking is the need for diverse teams in the more traditional sense, but also psychologically.
Yeah.
In other words, Dave, good morning to you.
Good morning, Clive.
You're trying to banish, I think, groupthink, that focus on diversity of thought Gender, race, sexuality, of course, yes, but also psychologically, drawing on people's different experiences and approaches.
Yeah, that's right. One of the biggest problems I get when I work with companies is homogeneity of thought. When everyone thinks the same things, they have the same assumptions, the same ways of doing things, they're in the same environment, they come up with the same kinds of ideas. And my job is to try and get them to ideas that are going to be different, new ideas that will have an impact in their business. So in my last book, I explored a little bit about how difference makes us valuable. And some of the stats that I came up with were extraordinary. When you look at diversity, gender diversity and ethnic diversity in leadership positions, it has an extraordinary effect on the profitability of companies. I mean, in some cases, we're talking about 30 to 40% more profitable when you start getting diversity in leadership. So if I was an investor, I'd be wanting to know how diverse is the leadership before I dropped any money in the stock market. And I also look at neurodiversity. It's just how the brain, how we're all wired slightly differently. And personally, if I was an American school kid, I'd be in Ritalin right now. And I would, I would also probably be diagnosed with dyslexia earlier than the age of 36, which is when I actually discovered I was. But I'm very interested in difference, in embracing difference, not just getting people who are different into an environment, into the workplace, but then embracing that difference and using it for good.
Right, it's about banishing institutionalization. It's going to be fascinating to sort of get further into that down the line. And finally, Sanjeev Bhaskar, renowned actor and writer who's passionate about diversity, a graduate recruit at IBM before acting beckoned. He's been Chancellor of Sussex University, my alma mater, by the way, for the last decade. Sanjeev, explain why this is so crucial to the well-being of any society, diversity, in your opinion.
Well, the advantage of going last in a panel is that you realise that everybody has said exactly what you wanted to say, word for word, and probably better than you could. Everything that I've done across working initially in industries and then as an actor and a writer has highlighted to me in the last few years, I think more so than at any other time, the importance of being able to adapt and innovate and respond to the unexpected. And a diverse team of people will have access to a broader spectrum of creativity, of thought, of ideas, of approaches and experiences in particular that become essential in solving a problem or facing up to a challenge, more than a team of people that think in exactly the same way. I mean, all the stuff I've ever done in terms of writing has been about challenging preconceptions. And the difficulty with preconceptions is that they're very often just utterly wrong. And if a company is basing their approaches on a bunch of preconceptions, then they may well find themselves in trouble. Also, diversity just reflects not only the world that we live in, but the world that most of us are interested and entertained by. And ultimately, you know, diversity is just more fun.
I'm with you on that. Thank you, Sanjeev. Let's get into the discussion now. Anne-Marie, I mean, perhaps in recent years, the battle for gender equality on conditions in the workplace, pay, seniority, and so on, no question, I think, things have got better, but there's still a hell of a lot of work to do. And science, technology, engineering, mathematics, are these the areas that are perhaps the last holdouts of male dominance?
I guess, like you said, that we've made a lot of progress, but we're not quite there. So I think there are definitely still other areas that have male dominance. But I think for me, the science, technology, engineering, maths, the STEM, and if we want, we can, some people use the term STEAM to incorporate the arts within that. It's definitely one that has grown so much in significance, and it's become something that's no longer kind of the preserve of the geeks or of the nerds or of the geniuses. You know, Facebook is a household name, and there's all kinds of things that have been going on there. And so we can't ignore this technology, we can't ignore this innovation. If we're using facial recognition technology now to fight to fight crime, right? And then it still is lacking and is still highly ineffective because of a lack of diversity in the teams that have developed this technology. Even though it might not be the last bastion, it's a fairly important and fairly influential one, that we do need to make sure we've got the right kind of diversity in those teams and making those technical decisions, and building that technology. So it's not the last one. You know, there's lots of places that are still male dominated. There's a lot of work still to go, but it's definitely an important one that we need to edit and switch up.
I mean, gender parity, what extra would that bring? Apart from obviously the moral argument that, you know, 51% of society is female, so they should be represented in business and in technology and science and mathematics and so on. But is there anything extra that is brought to the table as a result of that?
So there's a lot that's brought to the table. I think that the first thing I'd say is talent. You know, these things don't reside on the Y chromosome. This technical ability isn't just in the Y chromosome. And so by not having the women ably represented, it means that we're actually just missing the talent. And there's a great skills shortage that we have across this industry at the moment, where we don't have enough people to work in these roles or to build this technology. And so talent is one, and the other is the female perspective, which is missing from so many different places. And it's not purely about saying, you know, women think a certain way, and so if we have them in technology, we'll have certain technology. But it's just saying it's a perspective that is really missing. And we see this, you know, I love doing this when I'm doing speaking to kind of various different audiences. But if you think of something like periods, which we don't hear about enough, so many people have a menstrual cycle. It's part of our health, and part of the way that some of us have to measure our health and track our health. And so if you're building a technology platform that's around health, and you don't have a single person who's ever had a period in the room, how are you going to be able to build that in a way that works? And there are countless technology companies who have launched with great fanfare, only to realize that if they'd have listened to anyone that had a period, or if they'd ever met anyone that had a period, that they'd be able to save a lot of egg that had been on their face from really poorly constructed features. So it's things like that. But, you know, there's all kinds of things, from, you know, even just the way even social media is set up, for example. So it's very egocentric. It's centered on the individual. You know, if there are slightly different people in the room when we came up with this idea initially, and we said, I want to build something that allows anybody to say anything to anyone, I'm pretty sure if you had slightly different people in the room, they would have kind of said at the beginning, I wonder whether that's a good idea. I can think of maybe 10 reasons why you don't want anyone to say anything to anybody else. You know, I don't have to be a woman to know that, right? But it's just having those different perspectives in the room that we definitely need.
Absolutely. And obviously in the middle of the current pandemic that we're in, people are pointing to Prime Minister of New Zealand, the leader of South Korea, Angela Merkel, as being 3 leaders, 3 women who've done the best job in dealing with this disaster, which is interesting.
And the thing to note on that, if I can, Clive, is that it's not solely about them being women in leadership. It's about them being in environments that will allow women and will trust those women and respect them enough to take them on as leaders, which is what the difference has been.
All right. Okay. Anne-Marie, thank you for that. Sophie, let's turn to you. Your most recent book takes an almost philosophical view on the fluidity of love, and I suppose by extension, sexuality. Is that what you'd like employers to do, in a sense? Be looser in their characterizations of people, not see sexuality, but just see people?
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, I guess as an actor and a writer, I come at it from a point of view of the imagination. So I know that for some people, their experiences haven't been that they know maybe any gay or transgender people, and they don't necessarily feel comfortable with language, and they feel left out too. So when you have a more diverse workforce, one of the ideas would be how you can use the imagination of people to engage them with the situations. I mean, one of the things that we find, that I find as a lesbian, is that I'm constantly having to come out, for instance, because people make certain assumptions. And in the workplace, I think that's quite intimidating for people. So they have to constantly correct people or make the decision not to, and then they have to deal with the reaction of the other person if they do come out. Things like that, which seem like small things, but when I've talked to companies if I've talked to their HR department, for instance, once you've told your own story and what that means, and you engage people's imaginations into the sort of personal day-to-day experience of being gay in the workplace, then you find that people are very, very willing to engage with that. They want to, but they just needed to have some of the language and also to understand, to see it from the other person's point of view. So yes, this book is all about being able to imagine things from other people's point of view. Every chapter deals with a whole new way of looking at the world. And yeah, I think that it's obviously really important, but it's really important for both sides, because it makes such a difference to all of us when we know how to speak to each other and how to have a little glimpse into their life.
Sure. Is that tiring? I mean, is it tiring having to come out, you know, every time you meet someone new? Because I know certainly from covering the Black Lives Matter protests and covering race relations in America for the last sort of 25, 30 years, there is just a level of exhaustion at having to explain why, if you're black, you feel you're discriminated against, explaining that to white people.
Yeah.
Do you feel that as well, in a way?
Yes, I mean, in some ways I've sort of taken that on as a bit of a role, if you like, and I don't feel it sort of publicly as a burden. It's more personally, but you know, you've got so books like, you know, Why I Don't Want to Talk to White People About Race. You can imagine it also from all our different perspectives.
Exactly.
It is tiring, and when you get in a cab and you've got to make those choices, or anywhere that you go, you've got to decide: do I become this default person who's married to a guy? And but it really is helpful when people meet different people who are prepared to talk about it. But yes, as you say, sometimes it's absolutely exhausting.
Yeah. Okay. Adam, the importance of role models from your perspective. I mean, how essential are they? And I would point to you as that kind of person, a role model, essentially. How important is it that there are more people like you who are breaking stereotypes and preconceived notions?
I think role models are something that we all look for. We all look to or for people who are good at what we want to be good at, or who in some way we identify with. And growing up as a young disabled male with a facial disfigurement, when I was a kid, I didn't think disabled people were allowed on TV because there were so few to none of them. And I think there also comes a almost Damascus Road moment where you need to stop looking for a role model and decide to become one and put your head down and crack on. And so now I've dedicated, 20-something years now to ensuring that if there is someone who is like me, however that chooses to manifest themselves, they know that they can, you know, go into a job interview, go into a bar, go around in public without kind of fear of ridicule, or without having to almost justify their existence in that space. That whole "what are you doing here? Where's your carer?" misconception can be very much dead, buried, and done away with.
Is part of the issue when it comes to the workplace and businesses and so on, simply having to have the infrastructure in place in the office in order to deal with employees who may have disabilities, and does that make it easier perhaps for an employer to just decide, I'm not gonna go down that road, I'm just gonna pick the obvious person?
Disability is, when it comes to diversity, is unique. There's a statistic from the Valuable 500 that 98% of companies do diversity, but only 4% do disability. And I'm of the belief that that's because it's the only real area that costs money, where you've got to put your money where your mouth is in order to nail it. We can send round an email to the entire workforce going, hey, we've got a new woman coming in, or we've got kind of a black guy starting, or we've got a trans person starting. If we could all dial back the bigotry tomorrow, that'd be amazing. Whereas you can't get at your stairs to be rampier in the morning, or you can't get at a wall to become a lift over the weekend. You've really got to work at it. And also with disability, it's an area where you don't get it till you get it, and no one thinks about it, which befuddles me in the sense of a good friend of mine, Lost Voice guy, says that there are two types of people in this world: disabled people and people who will be disabled. And so if there's anyone who is high up in corporate watching this right now, if, God forbid, you were to be in an accident and need to use a wheelchair, for example, be it temporarily or even full time, how does your journey to work look now? How accessible is your office now? And it also isn't rocket science. It isn't that hard. It's a real mountain out of molehill argument to make for not doing something. And I think that comes from the lack of disabled people in positions of influence within companies who have the power to say, all right, can we all sit back and chill out for a moment? Here's how we can do this properly.
Which is precisely why I started with the idea of role models. You need them in those positions of influence in any company. Dave, let's turn to you now. Institutionalization. I mean, there is no point being unique, having a different perspective, only to have that individuality ground out of you by the atmosphere of the workplace and the culture of the workplace in which you exist. You could have Anne-Marie, Sophie, Adam, Sanjeev, myself, all in the same workplace, diverse people, yet we all end up thinking the same.
Yeah.
How do you stop that happening?
Well, I think one of the problems we've had in recent years, the last 10, 15 years, we've had this focus on culture. And so many companies have been saying it's all about culture. Culture is really important. And I think that the way that most companies have done culture is wrong. I think that what they've done is they've defined the edges of their circle as to this is what we are inside the circle. And what it does is it becomes this cookie cutter. The people who don't fit comfortably into that chunk, down comes this sort of cookie cutter of culture, and it slices off the bits that aren't relevant to the organization. And that then it loses all this huge amount of value from people. And I think that there's so much that companies get wrong with this. And I think that the problem with presenteeism, the problem with the focus on productivity is also leading to people just becoming machines. And when you're an unthinking machine within the system, you cannot use your brain. You cannot make decisions to say, actually, I'm looking for something that's different, because you're measured on how consistently you can produce the same stuff. So I've got a problem with a lot of company cultures. And as you're saying, a lot of it comes down to leadership. And leadership needs to trust people. It needs to embrace difference rather than trying to reject difference, because that's what most management is about trying to treat everyone as exactly the same, which is not what diversity is about. Diversity is about allowing for people's differences, not trying to make everyone into identical work units. And that's become my issue with a lot of companies. And I end up having to work with them to try and get them to understand that rather than the whole thing that we naturally have built into us from being 3-year-olds, spot the difference, which one's the odd one out, it's actually spot the similarity. Spot the things we have in common. Spot the stuff that actually is core to human beings. And when we start there, it's a very different approach. And I think we need more of that kind of attitude in the workplace.
But there has to be a commonality of purpose, doesn't there? Which is to, make this company, business, whatever it is, the best it can be in whatever particular field that we're talking about. There has to be a unity of ideas to a degree, doesn't there?
I think, yeah, purpose is absolutely right. And companies need to have purpose. But I think as part of their purpose, they need to have the purpose of embracing individuals for their strengths, for their difference. Rather than, it's the difference between putting company first and putting humans first. A company You can either see as an entity that's on the stock exchange, that is something that is now fighting for its own survival, and in America has voting rights. I think that's shocking. Or you can see it as a group of people who are working together around a common purpose. And I think that's the way that I'd rather see a company, is that we have a common purpose, but we've got a group of individuals who are helping make that purpose happen.
And if you've got all those different talents and minds all working together, then that energizes and brings a sense of added purpose to the organization.
And it broadens the kind of ideas you can have, the kind of approaches you can have, what the company can do. But if we've got the cultural cookie cutter, you lose all that.
All right. Okay. Sanjeev, you're of South Asian heritage. I'm of Afro-Caribbean heritage. We're both BAME. Is that a problem sometimes?
It's a very, very, very broad brush, and you know, it negates the personal experiences of people, and particularly for putting a team together. You know, to simply take that broadest brush and say, well, we now have a BAME person in our team, and so therefore we are diverse, is kind of missing the point again about the diversity of thought, approach, experiences that one might have. And so, you know, my experience as somebody of Indian heritage is very different from somebody who may have Bangladeshi heritage. And, you know, the B in BAME is black. And so the experiences of someone who's from a Caribbean background is very different from somebody from an African background, and then different from East African to West African, etc. So the key, I think, to putting a team together is to get to those personal experiences and stories that will feed into the creativity and to the innovation and to the response and problem solving that your team, your company will need. So I think it's about getting past the acronym. I think it's getting past whatever term someone puts up there and being aware that, you know, that simply, you know, tipping your hat to the term BAME is insufficient.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, in my own office at the BBC, there is a class distinction between some people, obviously, as in the rest of society. But you're seeing, for instance, far more South Asians who are reaching positions of seniority than you would see African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans rather, because of that class distinction between the two groups. And class is something that we haven't discussed so far today. We've discussed whole other ideas on when it comes to diversity, but class is an important part of this discussion as well, isn't it?
It is important, yeah. And once again, you know, the issues around class circumvent experiences, personal experiences of individuals. So again, you know, you can you know, have a nod and an acknowledgement of someone's background. It'll be the stories within that and what they've experienced that will kind of ultimately feed into your team and into your kind of diversity of thought. And you know, class has been an issue here. It is everywhere. I mean, in different countries, there are hierarchies of any kind. But the people who are deemed to have been from a less privileged background, say, who have achieved something, and this goes back to the point you were making with Adam about role models, is that these are people who've overcome something. They've kind of hit their head on the glass ceiling and many times have broken through it. And those become inspirational. So, you know, there's that adage of you have to see it to be it. And I think that's one of the things that breaks down those class barriers, as it does break down barriers of whatever kinds of preconceptions and prejudices may exist beforehand.
Okay, we're going to leave it there then. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us. And I'm now going to hand over to JJ.
Brilliant. And thank you for joining us today. I will just pass over to our panelists, who I will thank again for taking part. As I'm sure you all agree with me, it was an absolutely wonderful panel today. So thank you, Adam. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Sanjeev. And thank you, Anne-Marie. Please do check them all out. There's a whole variety of summer reading there for you. I'm sure you'll join me in thanking them for doing a wonderful thing. Thank you to Clive for absolutely stunning job. We will see you all very, very soon. So thank you very much and goodbye.